There we go. Okay, so tonight is chapter 5, Mishna 3, moving along. It's good to be back. I guess they call it like a new semester. New back. In yeshiva terms, we call it the new Zman, which really only starts next week. Usually it starts with Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, with the beginning of the month of the next month. But nevertheless, we're starting now, the new semester, the new term, and Mirz Hashem, we will have a certain degree of continuity that we'll be able to sort of bank on every week. There will be a couple of days that I'll be traveling, but we'll take that as we go along. Okay, so the Mishnah says, now you remember that this parak, this chapter, as we spoke about a little while ago, 2 months, that this chapter is the number chapter. It starts off with the number 10, which we've discussed. We're still in the tens, but in those we start off with tens. Then we go to sevens. Then we go to fours, to threes. And there's just an incredible amount of information, of basic Jewish information and basic Jewish, what we call Jewish hashkafa, really Jewish understanding that comes through in these Mishnayos. In this Mishnah, we talk about Asar Nisyonos Nisas Avraham, that with 10 tests, Avraham Avinu was tested. Olav Shalom, of blessed memory, V'omad Bekulam, and he was successful in all of them. That Avraham Avinu was able to pass every single one of the tests that he was given. Lahodia, and the purpose of the tests was to let us know Kama chibaso shel Avraham Avinu olav shalom, that how dear Avraham Avinu was to God. Okay, so then Mishnah, you can't hear me? Are you guys having trouble hearing me? Is everyone able to hear me? Well, I think people are freezing up. Okay, we'll do the best we can. Okay, so again, that these 10 tests that Avraham Avinu was given, that he was given these 10 tests, and the Mishnah says that this was to show the purpose of the 10 tests was Lahodia Kama Chibaso Shel Avraham Avinu Olav Shalom, was how dear Avraham Avinu was to God. Now, the problems that I have in this Mishnah are as follows. First of all, it says that Avraham Avinu was tested with 10 tests. Avraham Avinu was not the only one of our forefathers that was tested. You know, Yitzchak had a pretty rough life himself. As a matter of fact, we don't really know much about Yitzchak's life in the Torah. We know that he had 2 sons. We know that he was taken up to the top of the mountain. He was going to be slaughtered, which was an incredibly traumatic event. I mean, you have to imagine, you're going, your dad tells you we're going up to serve God. You're walking up the mountain with your dad, and you're talking to him about, doing the sacrifice, and it's going to be really something interesting. And, then you say to him, Dad, where's the sacrifice? And your dad just sort of feebly smiles at you. And, and then you realize you get one of those V8 moments, and you realize, oh my God, I'm going to be the sacrifice. And you realize that, your dad is going to slaughter you. It's got to be a tremendous trauma. I mean, today, if that story would have happened today, Yitzchak would have turned to Avraham Avinu and said to him, "You touch me, and I'm calling Child Protective Services." And it would have been a totally different event. Instead, Yitzchak turns to his father and he says to him, "Abba kafteni yafa yafa, tie me down really well, so that I don't flinch, because if I flinch, you're going to hit the wrong place on me. And it's going to be a shchita that's not kosher. It's going to be a slaughter that's not kosher. It's going to be a waste of time." We know that Yitzchak became blind in his old age. Our rabbis say the reason that he became blind is because the angels cried into his eyes and the tears dripped into his eyes on the Akedah. Whether that's literal or not literal, what we understand is that he went through an event, he went through an experience that was so traumatic to him that it just changed his life, and he was never able to really recover from that. So why don't we say that Yitzchak was also tested? And what about Yaakov? Yaakov, he starts his life off by being pushed down by his brother. Then he's always in the shadow of his brother. His father loves his brother and not him. And then he has this event with his brother. And then his brother wants to kill him. He has to run away. He ends up with a father-in-law from Gehenna. He's separated from his parents. He never sees never sees his mom again. I mean, once, the one thing after another, his daughter gets raped, his sons have a battle, they throw the kid into he throws his beloved son into a pit, he never sees him again. I mean, it's just one trauma after another trauma. One test after another test to see if Yaakov is going to have faith. Yaakov ends up down in Mitzrayim. The last 17 years of his life are the only years in his life that he actually lived. We're told that he lived for 17 years, right? Vaychi Yaakov beretz Mitzrayim shvas rishon. He lived for 17 years. So rabbis say those were the only 17 good years of his life. Can you imagine? And he has to leave Eretz Yisrael. Why doesn't the Mishna say that he was tested also? He was also tested. All the Mishna seems to be focused on is that Avraham Avinu was tested. And what about us? We don't have tests. We don't have things in our lives, every single one of us, every single day, things that are nisyonos, that are tests. We're not living through the biggest test in history since the Holocaust for the Jewish people. To have to step out of shul, to have our normal daily lives disrupted this way, to be in the constant fear of getting sick and of listening to finding out who's going to be sick next and how sick are they going to be and what's going to happen next. I mean, this is normal. This is also a huge nisayon. Why doesn't the Mishnah say that we're constantly living with tests? If you're trying to teach me a value here, remember, this is ethics of the fathers. It's trying to teach me some kind of ethical value. It's trying to teach me some kind of moral value. Then what do I care that Avraham Avinu was tested 10 times? Any more than Yitzchak or Yaakov? Any more than you and I? So that's my first problem of what is the ethical lesson of Asara Nisyonos Nisasa Avraham Avinu. Second problem, why is he called Avraham Avinu? Did you notice in the last Mishnah, if you have it in front of you, you can see in the last Mishnah it says that there were 10 generations from Noach to Avraham. He's only called Avram there. And then in this Mishnah, the same person is being spoken about, and it says, Asar Nisyonos Nisasa Avram Avinu. Now we know him as Avram Avinu, but in the previous Mishnah, we called him Avram. And now all of a sudden we're calling him Avram Avinu. Why the change? Why are we calling him Avram Avinu here? Plus, what is this idea of a nisayon, of a test? You know, the word nes, which means a banner, the word nes, which means a miracle, and the word nes or nisayon, which means a test, have to have some kind of connection with each other. What's the connection? So I'll tell you that the first thing that I think that the Mishnah is telling us is that the Mishnah is not denying that everybody had tests. Yitzchak had tests, Yaakov had tests. Well, you don't think Moshe Rabbeinu had a test? Moshe Rabbeinu had to carry the Jews on his shoulders. He wiped their behinds. He did everything for them. He schlepped them out of Mitzrayim. He gave them everything. He prayed for them. He worried about them. He lost sleep. He lost his family. He lost everything for the Jewish people. And he ended up losing his ability to be able to go into the land of Israel for them. Well, you don't think that he was tested? Everybody was tested. Every one of our greats was tested. But this mission is focusing only on one thing. It's focusing only on Avraham Avinu. Because these particular tests that Avraham Avinu was tested with, they were designed specifically for Avram, the first of our forefathers, because they were meant to impart a message and a midah and a characteristic in the Jewish people that the tests of Yitzchak did not impart, the tests of Yaakov did not impart, your and mine's regular tests do not impart. This was groundbreaking events that took place in order to be able to set a standard in the Jewish people and to be able to set a threshold for the generations to come. So first of all, what are those 10 tests? So there are different lists amongst our rabbis of what those 10 tests are. I will tell you that the most common list of tests is that the first is that Avraham Avinu was thrown into the fiery furnace. That we know that there was a king by the name of Nimrod. That Nimrod was a vicious king. He also was a king who had made himself into an idol and expected everyone to bow down to him. Terach, Avram's father, who realized that his kid was not going into the idolatry business, turned his son into Nimrod. And Nimrod said to him, if you bow down to me, you won't die. But if you don't bow down to me, you don't have to worship me. You just have to bow down. Then I'm going to have to throw you into a fiery furnace. And Avraham Avinu said, fine. He said, throw me into a fiery furnace, but I'm not gonna bow down to you. And he took Avraham Avinu and he threw him into a fiery furnace. 3 days later, Avraham Avinu emerged from the fiery furnace unscathed, protected, taken care of. While he was inside the Kivshon Ha'esh, while he was inside that fiery furnace, God provided miraculously for him. And when Avraham Avinu walked out, he walked out a different human being. Second test. God comes to Avraham Avinu and says to him, Lech lecha me'artzecha. Leave your land, leave your father's place, leave your homeland, leave your people, and follow me to a place that I'm not telling you where we're going. Third test was he finally gets to that place that God promised him. And as soon as he gets there, there is a terrible famine and he has to leave the promised land, the land that God gave to him. The fourth test is that the wicked king Paro took away his wife Sarah. And then that event happened again, parallel event later, when Avimelech took away his wife. Avraham Avinu then needed to go to war in order to be able to save his brother-in-law, cousin, the nephew, Lot, who he wasn't particularly fond of, but he had to go to war in order to be able to save him. And it was a world war, and it was really Avraham Avinu against everybody else. Then he has to marry Hagar. Then he has a bris at 99. It doesn't matter what you tell me, but a bris at 99 has got to be one of the biggest challenges in his life. God comes to him at 99. It's not like God comes to him and says, by the way, I'm going to give you the number of a good mile. God gives him a knife and a book of instructions, like, an IKEA instructions of how to perform a bris milah on himself at 99. Without even a bottle of, Knob Hill or something, something to numb it a little bit. Nothing. He gives him a knife. He tells him to do the bris milah. What kind of tremendous nisayon that was. And then he has to kick out Hagar and Yishmael from his house. And then we're told about the Akedah. Now, the truth is that any one of these nisyonos, of these tests, was like enormous, was huge. Can you imagine that you get thrown into a fiery furnace? You have to make a choice that you're not going to give up on God, and you're going to hold on to God and get thrown into a fiery furnace. Being asked to leave everything you love and everything you know, leave it behind for an uncertain future. Every single one of these is huge. What exactly was being designed by God? What was God trying to teach Avraham Avinu? What was he trying to teach us? So the classic answer is that he was trying to show Avraham the kind of faith that he had in God. And he wanted him to know that he really believed in God. So he tested that, not because God was unsure whether Abraham believed in him or not. He wanted Abraham to know the extent to which he was willing to go to bat for God, and the extent to which he was willing to keep himself connected to God. Not that I think that's wrong, but I think that any one of these tests could have proven that. I think that test number 10 could have proven it. He's willing to kill his kid for God. I think that's enough. I think that there's another nakuda, there's another point that God was trying to get across. And the truth is that if all these tests happen this way, maybe the reason for these tests was to show the world how powerful Avraham was, that he was able to withstand the threats of a king Nimrod. He was able to separate himself from his past. He was able to stand up to Paro. He was able to stand up to Avimelech. He was able to go to war with the world, to take dirt and to throw it at them, and it becomes bows and arrows. That Avraham Avinu was able to withstand the test of a bris. What would you say if you heard that a guy lived through all of these events? What would you call such a person? Sir. In other words, you'd be petrified of a person like that. You wouldn't go near a person like that. You wouldn't want to start up with a person like that. You would say this person is invincible. This person is the most powerful person in the world. Maybe that's why God gave him the test, so that the world would shake from him. Maybe it was to make him different. So the truth is, if you look at it carefully, Avraham wasn't taken any more seriously because of these tests. Nobody was tittering because of Avraham Avinu. Nobody was shaking in their boots because of Avraham. It wasn't to prove him to other people. That wasn't the reason why. So we have to uncover and understand what was the common denominator in every one of these tests. So we have to ask the question, who was Avraham Avinu? What was his life dedicated to? So I think that all of us know that what Avraham Avinu was dedicated to was he was dedicated to chesed, to kindness. Titen emes liYaakov v'chesed la'Avram. That God gave kindness to Avram, because that's what Avram's life was all about. Avraham Avinu was dedicated to kindness not because he was a good Samaritan, but because Avraham Avinu dedicated himself to truth, dedicated himself to the love and the desire to help other people, and that became the very essence of Avraham Avinu. It wasn't what he did, it was who he was. For many people, chesed is an action. It's a thing we do, but it's not necessarily a thing we are. It's possible to have a person, we've spoken about this many times, it's possible to have a person that is a Baal Chesed, that is a kind person, but it's not really a Baal Chesed. They're not really a kind person. They do tremendous kindness, but they do calculated kindness. They do kindness that's putting out fires. I see you have a need. I'm going to take care of your need. I'm going to help you. But it's not necessarily because I love you. It's not necessarily because I'm concerned about you. It's because that's the right thing to do. You see a person that's on fire, you put the fire out. You see a person that's got a great need, you fill the need. You see a person that has no money, you help them with something. That's what a mensch does. But that's not what a Baal Chesed does. A Baal Chesed spends his time looking around and hunting to find the need before it arises so that he can then fill that need. Where did that kind of kindness hit the world? At the moment of creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't look at the human being and say, I need to create kindness for him. I need to do something nice for him. He created a human being so that he could perform acts of kindness. The whole concept of creation is there in order for God to be able to bestow kindness on the human being. He created a world, he created a matzav, he created a whole situation so that he could bestow kindness. That was the kind of kindness that Avraham Avinu did. That Avraham Avinu looked for situations where he could do this kind of kindness for another human being. He didn't wait for somebody to ask and then say, of course, I'll give you whatever you need. He searched out the person. He searched for what their need would be and then created a situation where he could then fill that need. If you look carefully at every one of these tests, every one of these tests was a test to that nature of Avraham Avinu, the nature of chesed, of kindness. That Avraham Avinu was being put in a situation where he had to act in the antithesis of what his character was, of what his natural state was. If you take the fiery furnace, God was asking him to really, Avraham Avinu, all he wanted was he wanted peace, he wanted love, he wanted connections. And what he was doing was forcing Avraham Avinu to stand completely apart from the rest of the world. Avraham Avinu at one point in his life was called an Ivri, and the reason he was called an Ivri is because he was Me'ever Hayam. He was on the one side of the river and everybody else was on the other. There wasn't one other person that believed in the God and in the morality that Avraham Avinu believed in. The Kivshan Aish, the fiery furnace, was really just a crescendo to that kind of existence, of existing apart from people. Take a Baal Chesed and put him in a situation where he has to separate himself. That is an incredible test. Is he willing to go against his character in order to do the right thing? God comes to him and says, Lech lecha me'artzecha, leave everything you have behind. Every single thing, every single person, every single connection, every single relationship that you have, you need to dump. Your cousins, your brothers, your father. Everything that you know, your community, your school, your old buddies, your new buddies, everything. Leave it behind. A person who lives for other people to tell him that he has to separate himself? You're asking him to break his very character, to break his very nature. Every single one of these tests, to marry Hagar, to associate with someone who really there was no reason for him to have to associate with, to make children with such a person, and then to take the son who he had created with her, and now to have to throw him out of the house. And then to tell a person of chesed and kindness and love, take your child, bring him up on top of a mountain and slaughter him? The whole reason that God designed these tests for Avraham was to fine-tune Avraham himself and to teach him how to go against his nature. Because that's what Torah is. There are parts of Torah that are very easy for every person here. And every single person has a challenge in other parts of Torah. And the reason is because we each have different natures. And my nature is more mat'im. My nature resonates more with certain commandments and certain parts of Judaism than other people's. And what God is asking me in Taryag Mitzvos and 613 commandments is he's asking me to be willing to go against my nature to serve him. To serve him with my nature, there's a difficulty to that, but that's child's play. but to go against my nature. Now, for some people, they're very kind, so the mitzvahs of kindness resonate with them. They love the mitzvahs of tzedakah. You take a person who's a people person, they love the mitzvahs ben adam lechaveru, but then when you tell them that they have to measure their tzitzis, they have to worry about the size of a mitzvah, they have to worry about the details of some ritual commandment, they look at that and they go, that's nuts. The very same person that will go to the end of the world to give tzedakah, to have a guest in their home, to be able to take care of a person, when it comes to davening with a minyan, or when it comes to some other kind of obligation, it's the biggest battle in the world. When it comes to kashrus, or when it comes to Shabbos, they're like killing themselves. And you have other people that are ritualistically inclined. There are people that need regimen in their lives. There are people that resonate with regimen. When they're told, put your right foot here, put your left foot here, they are in hog heaven. They love it. They love that sense of living with ritual, of living with meaning and purpose, of doing things. But when it comes to smiling at another person, when it comes to not gossiping about another person, when it comes to giving tzedakah, that's their challenge. Everybody's got their challenge. And to be a Jew, you have to understand how to break through your challenge. Greatness doesn't live in excelling in what you excel in just developing what you excel in and making that into something beautiful. It's great, but that's not greatness. Greatness is taking those things that are challenging to you and climbing over those mountains, being able to subdue those natural yitzers, those inclinations, those things that are dragging you to other places, and to be able to climb over those and to make something of yourself, that's godless. That's real greatness. I was telling somebody today, there were these books about Gedolim, these books about great rabbis, which are really, they're amazing books. They're amazing. The stories are amazing. They tell about the Satmar Rebbe. There's a halacha that if you scratch your scalp, then you have to wash it, and you're learning Torah or you're going to make a bracha, you have to wash your hands, because the scalp is a place in your body that's covered. And therefore, if you touch it while you're going to say something, a dvarim shebekdusha, something of holiness, then you have to clean yourself. You have to wash your hands. Okay. So they say a story about the Satmar Rebbe, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, Zechet Tzaddik v'Kodesh Livracha, that when he was a baby, 2 years old, in a crib, when he would scratch his head, he wasn't wearing a yarmulke yet. When he would scratch his head, he would put his hands inside of his pajamas, and he would scratch his head like this. Like, I don't know if you ever seen, a lot of times religious people, so when they scratch their head, they do like this, right? They scratch like through the yarmulke, so that they shouldn't have to wash their hands. So we're careful not to touch those places when we're learning or when we're davening, whatever. So when he was a baby in the crib, he would sit and do like this. And they say that when he was 3, he had incredible accomplishments, and the Torah that he learned when he was 5 and 7. I read stories like that and I say, shkoyach, it got nothing to do with me. I was not like that. I was a normal baby, a wild child. Like, those stories don't do anything for me. They don't tell me anything. But you read a story about people that as children, as Gedolim, giants of Torah, but that as children, a little naughty, a little unfocused, and they learned how to focus. You read about Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Zechet Tzaddik v'Kodesh Livracha, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in the Mir Yeshiva, who was a person who lived, he was as a 14-year-old American boy. He was from the dynasty of the Mir Rosh Yeshiva. He went to Eretz Yisrael from Chicago. He went to a co-ed school in Chicago. And he was 14 years old. He went to spend the summer with his uncles and to learn with them. And then he went back, and then he stayed, and eventually he became a Gadol Ador. He became a giant in Torah and became the Rosh Yeshiva of the Mir Yeshiva. They have a picture of him when he was 14 in a Cubs baseball cap. That's somebody I could relate to. He started off in a certain way, started off as a regular American kid, and then developed. He took himself out of an environment and developed himself into something. That's what the Mishnah is teaching us about the tests of Avraham Avinu. The tests of Avraham Avinu were designed for a Baal Chesed. This was not Yitzchak's test. This was not Yaakov's test. This was not even other people's tests. This was Avraham's tests, because Avraham Avinu needed to set out in the Jewish people this concept that we need to have the strength and ability to be able to go against our natures, because that's where greatness lives. That's the reason why he's called Avraham Avinu in this Mishnah. Because he is our Av, he's our father. Because he taught us this most important fundamental. God's training a nation. He's setting the roots for a nation. The first root is that you have to have the strength to do the right thing, whether it's comfortable or whether it's not comfortable. Most people, their walls are as soon as it becomes uncomfortable. As soon as it's no longer something that's logical, as soon as it's no longer that something that resonates with our lifestyle, as soon as it's something that takes us away from the rest of the world, that's where our boundary is. And that's what God was trying to teach us. With this nisayon, with this test, these 10 tests, this nace, this banner that God was waving, was to show us who Avraham Avinu was. He was a person who was able to go against his nature. There were no personal motives. It wasn't because he was going to gain anything, but it was because he had a desire and a need to do the right thing, because it's God's will, not because there's any inherent reward. He did it because it was the will of God, not necessarily his own will. Now, you have to understand how far that goes. God, the nations of the world, the Gemara says that the nations of the world are going to turn to God in the future, and they're going to say to God, we have a taina on you. We have a complaint against you. Why? Because you didn't give us the Torah. So God turns to the nations of the world and he said, I couldn't give you the Torah. Why? Because you never would have accepted it. So the nations say, well, it's not fair. You didn't hold a mountain over our heads like you'd hold over the Jews. How do you know we wouldn't have taken the Torah? So God said to them, I know you wouldn't have taken the Torah. So they were upset. So God said, I'll prove it to you. So he went and he gave them a mitzvah. You know what mitzvah he gave them? Sukkah. Sukkah. That was the mitzvah that he used. The Gemara calls it a mitzvah kala because it's cheap. Yeah, pre-Home Depot days, right? Or lighter sukkah or sukkah depot days. But the mitzvah of sukkah is really, in essence, a cheap mitzvah. You just take a couple pieces of wood and you make a hut and shine. So the Gemara describes the joy, the happiness of the nations of the world and the Jews of going into the sukkah. And then God took the sun from its sheath and he made it as hot as blazes. And he put everybody in the sukkah. Now we know that a mitzvah put him in the sukkah, that a person who is in pain is allowed to leave a sukkah. So we left. The nations of the world left. The Jews left. But the Gemara says that when the nations of the world walked out of the sukkah, they were bayet b'sukkah. They kicked the sukkah on the way out. And God said to them, aha, you see, you can't keep mitzvos. What does that mean? They kicked the sukkah because they were ticked off, because all they wanted to do was to sit in God's sukkah. They just wanted to bask in his mitzvahs. That's all. They loved God. So why were they held responsible for it? So they kicked the sukkah. They were upset. They were frustrated. Because the same thing that was driving them into the sukkah should have been the exact same thing that drove them out of the sukkah, their desire to serve God. If God wants me in the sukkah, I'm happy to be there. And if God doesn't want me in the sukkah, I'm happy not to be there. Look, I've told you this story a million times. There was a fellow, an older man. His wife schleps him into the Rav. And she says to the Rav, could you talk to my husband? The doctor said if he fasts, he's going to die. My husband said he's not listening. He's fasting on Yom Kippur. So the Rav has a conversation with the fellow. And he says to the fellow, if the doctor says you're going to die, you can't fast. You're not allowed to fast. It's an avera to fast, transgression to fast. Guy says to him, Rabbi, what do you know? You're a 25-year-old guy. What do you understand? What do you know? I've been fasting for 60 years. You're going to tell me now that I shouldn't fast? So the rabbi looks at the fellow and he says to him, can you excuse me for a moment? I need to go talk to the gabbai of the shul. The fellow looks at him and he says to him, chutzpah, Rabbi, I'm in the middle of a meeting with you. Where are you going to talk to the gabbai now? He says, no, it's about you, because I have to tell the gabbai that he can no longer give you an aliyah in this shul. Guy looks at him and says, because I want to fast on Yom Kippur? So he says to him, no, we don't give aliyot in this shul to idol worshipers. Guy looks at him, so what are you talking about? He says, I don't care if your idol is called Zeus or Jesus or Yom Kippur. We don't give aliyahs to idol worshipers. What the rabbi was telling the fellow is that you're not serving God. Because if you were serving God, the very same desire to fast on Yom Kippur would have compelled you to say, I'm not allowed to fast on Yom Kippur. And in the same way, in past years, I relished in not eating. Now, in whatever way I need to eat, I'm going to perform that with the same kind of punctiliousness and preciseness, and with the same kind of service of God, of gusto to serve God as I did in previous years. Corona's taught us this. The wrong attitude in Corona is that, I have to do everything I can to try to go to shul, to do this, to do things that maybe are dangerous. Our attitude during Corona has to be that if this is the way the Rabbanu Shalom wants me to serve him now, this is the way I'm going to serve him, and I'm going to do this like a chassid. He right now, for whatever reason, he doesn't want to see me in shul. Givaldik. I'm going to daven outside a shul like I am the biggest chassid in the world. I'm going to pour my energy into my tefillah, into my davening. Is going to be unbelievable, because that's what God wants from me now. God wants me to have my chasanas in a different way. He wants me to have my shabbos in a different way. He wants me to do everything. Somebody came over to me on Simchas Torah, asked me a tremendous question. A person said to me that how can we dance on Simchas Torah this year? Because Simchas Torah, I hope we all know this, is about the siyum HaTorah. It's about the completion of the Torah, about the fact that we read through the entire Torah and then we're cleaning the cycle. We didn't read the whole cycle of the Torah. Vayakol, Pekudei, Vayikra, Tzav, Shmini. There were many Shabbos that we weren't in shul. Every shul in the world was closed. We didn't read the parshos in public. We didn't read them as a tzibur, as a congregation. How can you say that we're making a siyum HaTorah? This shouldn't be a moment of great joy. It should be the saddest Simchas Torah that we ever had. If God said to us that I don't want you in shul right now, That means whatever I would have gotten from Parshas Vayakov B'Kudei and from Parshas Vayikra and Sav and Shmini, all the way up to Shavuos, whatever I would have gotten from those Parshios, I could have accomplished by reading the Parsha, by studying the Parsha, by learning it from a Chumash, by doing what I could do to fill that gap inside of myself, which means that it was still available to me, which means that God was saying to me, I don't want you to disconnect from the Torah. I want you to do it in a different way, because that's what it means to serve God. That it's all about serving Him. It's not about serving ourselves. It's not about comfortable. It's not about the way we're used to doing it. It's not about a comfort zone. It's not about our nature. It's about going against our nature. When we go against our teva, that's where godless, that's where greatness lives. And that's why this test was given to Avraham Avinu. Not Yitzchak, not Yaakov. This is not about our daily tests. This is about our fundamental Jewish lives, that we need to understand that we're serving God, not us, and that if we're going to achieve greatness, it's only going to come when we step outside of our comfort zone and when we push beyond our natures. Beautiful. Okay, we'll stop there. And Mirz Hashem, we'll see everybody again next Monday. And we'll keep slogging away at the number 10. Next week, we talk about the 10 tests that the Jewish people were, the 10 miracles, that happened to the Jewish people in Egypt, and the 10 that happened to them on the sea. We'll also talk about the 10 tests that that our forefathers tested God in the desert. Okay, good. We'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rabbi. Very wonderful.
Thank you, Rabbi. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Of
It's
course.
great, really great to see everybody.
Great.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Of course. Thank you.
My pleasure. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.